Originally, both the Stroud and the Eklund corporations made consumer goods. Anything and everything a person could want. But after my husband and I married and merged the companies, we decided to make our mark on interstellar travel. And now the brand is nearly synonymous with starships. I still get questions from reporters wanting to know just how we pulled that transition off. And my answer is always the same. Money solves everything.
Somewhere above a frozen moon, a ship is being assembled that will one day carry someone to the edge of the known. It will be called an act of courage, a leap into the dark, a small rebellion against the comfort of staying home. What almost no one will ever say out loud is that before it was any of those things, it was a product, designed, costed, branded, and sold by people who never intended to fly it anywhere at all. We like to imagine exploration as the one human impulse that money cannot reach, the last clean thing, the opposite of commerce. But the vessel that carries our wonder is built on a balance sheet, and the man who paid for humanity's search for meaning spent his entire life keeping his own feet firmly on the ground. So the question worth sitting with is not whether the stars are worth reaching. It is quieter than that, and stranger. When the search for what is out there becomes an industry, when wonder is something you can purchase in a showroom, what exactly are we still searching for? To understand the answer, you have to go back to a marriage. Long before the name meant cutting-edge starships, before the orange-trimmed hulls and the gleaming showrooms, there were two separate companies and two separate people who had no particular reason to change the galaxy. They made things people wanted. Consumer goods, mostly. The kind of unremarkable products that fill a home and a life. The quiet machinery of ordinary prosperity. One of those companies carried a name that already had a little weight to it. The Eklund family had made themselves wealthy through a venture once known as Eklund's Shipbuilders, and wealth of that kind tends to accumulate not just credits, but a certain gravity, a sense that the family was meant for something larger than the things it sold. Then came the Colony War, and like every war, it ended by rearranging the world that survived it. Between 2308 and 2311, the settled systems tore at themselves, and when the fighting finally settled into an uneasy peace, the borders had been redrawn and the old certainties had loosened. It was in the aftermath of all that upheaval that Walter Stroud married Isa Eklund. He was the visionary, the one with the appetite for risk and the instinct for where a thing was heading. She brought the family's deep reserves of capital and the family's old name. And rather than simply combining two comfortable fortunes into one more comfortable fortune, they did something that, on paper, looked almost reckless. They bet everything on ships. It is easy to underestimate how strange that decision was. A company that has spent years learning how to make and sell consumer goods has built its entire body of knowledge around one kind of work. To pivot, all at once, into the manufacture of starships, into one of the most technically demanding, capital-hungry, and ruthlessly competitive industries in human space, is the kind of move that usually ends in quiet bankruptcy. The graveyard of ambition is full of firms that tried to become something they were not. What saved Stroud-Eklund from joining them was not modesty. It was money, and a great deal of it, deployed with a kind of patient aggression. They were able to bring such an overwhelming amount of capital to bear that the transition, which should have been agonizing, was instead almost smooth. They did not so much enter the shipbuilding industry as arrive in it, fully formed, already wealthy, already confident. And what they built caught everyone off guard. The established names in the trade, Deimos Star Yards with its long pedigree and its severe military lines, and Taiyo Astroneering with its sleek luxury and its corporate polish, suddenly found themselves looking at a newcomer whose ships were not merely competitive, but genuinely ahead. Almost overnight, a firm that had been making the small comforts of domestic life rebranded itself as a manufacturer of the most advanced vessels in the settled systems. The older star yards were forced into the undignified position of catching up, of reacting, of asking how a company that had not existed in this form a few years earlier was now setting the pace. This is the part of the story that gets told as triumph, and it is a triumph of a kind. But notice what it reveals: the frontier, the unknown, the great dark that Constellation and 100 lonelier explorers spent their lives trying to read, was, to Walter and Isa, a market. Not a mystery to be solved, but an opportunity to be seized. The war had loosened the old order, the systems were expanding. People were going to need ways to cross the immense distances between the stars, and whoever built the best vessels for that crossing would own a piece of every journey ever taken. Where an explorer looked at the dark and felt a question, the founders of Stroud-Eklund looked at the same dark and felt the pull of demand waiting to be met. Neither way of seeing is wrong, but they are not the same, and the difference between them will shadow everything that follows. The company was born from the marriage of vision and money, and the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to tell which of those two was really steering. You can read a company's soul in the objects it chooses to make beautiful, and Stroud-Eklund made its ships beautiful with a very particular kind of intention. Anyone who has spent time among the star yards learns to recognize a Stroud-Eklund vessel without needing to be told. There is the color, first of all, a cool professional gray broken by deliberate accents of orange, a palette that manages to look both restrained and unmistakable, the visual equivalent of a firm handshake. There are the curves, subtle and confident, never showy but never accidental, the smoothing away of the brutal angularity that defines a warship into something that suggests competence rather than threat. The engines are tucked out of sight, concealed rather than displayed, so that the eye is never drawn to the violence of propulsion, but to the clean lines of the hull. The docking ports and landing bays open from the side, an elegant practicality, and everywhere, woven into the hull and stamped across the components, is the branding, the name repeated, asserted, made part of the ship's very surface, so that to fly, it is to advertise it. That last detail is the one worth pausing on. On a Stroud-Eklund ship, even the act of leaving home carries a logo. The instrument of your independence is also a billboard. Step inside, and the message continues in a different register. The living quarters are bright, clean, high in technology, and high in comfort, the kind of interior that has been designed not merely to keep you alive in the void, but to make the void feel like somewhere you would choose to be. Other manufacturers built shelters against the dark. Stroud-Eklund built a lifestyle and pointed it at the stars. This is where the company's two homes start to matter, because the firm keeps its presence in two very different kinds of place, and the contrast between them tells you almost everything. The corporate headquarters sits in neon on a floor of the trade tower in the most unapologetically commercial city in human space. Neon is a place where, in Walter's own words, anything goes as long as you have the money. A city built on a platform over an alien ocean, devoted to pleasure and profit in roughly equal measure, where the line between what is sold and what is real has long since dissolved. To plant your headquarters, there is to declare what you are. The company that sells freedom keeps its offices in a tower devoted to commerce, surrounded by everything that money can be persuaded to buy. And then, far from all of that, there is the Star Yard. It hangs in the Narian system, in orbit around Dalvik, which is itself a moon of the gas giant Deepala. This is the industrial reality beneath the showroom gloss, the actual place where the actual ships are actually made, suspended in the cold above a frozen rock that circles a vast, silent world. There is something almost honest about the Star Yard, in the way that workshops are always more honest than storefronts. Out here, the romance is stripped back to its mechanics, docking clamps and dry docks, the patient labor of assembly, a vendor named Habershaw, who will sell you a vessel without any of the poetry. The frontier the company sells is glamorous. The place where the company touches the frontier is quiet, functional, and very far from anywhere. Between those two poles, the trade tower and the orbital workshop, lives the whole tension of what Stroud-Eklund actually is. In Neon, exploration is a desire to be stoked and satisfied. Above Dalvik, it is a job to be done. The showroom near the spaceport, where a buyer can step off the elevator and, a few storefronts down, contemplate a new ship the way one might contemplate a luxury vehicle, is the point where those two truths meet. You arrive wanting the dark, the distance, the great open question of it all. You leave having bought a beautifully branded machine. The company's genius was never really engineering. It was the quieter, more unsettling art of turning the longing for the unknown into a purchase you could feel proud of. And at the center of all this, funding it, steering it, embodying it, stands a man who, for all his genuine passion for the stars, never seems to have wanted to go out among them himself. Walter Stroud is not an explorer, and he has never pretended to be one. He is, by the most reliable accounts, a pragmatic and savvy businessman who nonetheless carries a real and abiding love of space exploration. And the way those two things sit side by side in him explains almost everything that follows. His genius is for expansion and acquisition, for brokering the high contracts and keeping the doors open. Watch how he moves through the world, though, and a pattern is hard to miss. Even his most idealistic gestures tend to take the shape of investments rather than adventures. He does not walk among the stars himself. He makes certain the way stays clear for those who do. The dare belongs to other people. What belongs to Walter is the arrangement that makes the dare possible. In 2321, he joined Constellation, the organization devoted to a single, almost childlike question: what is out there? And his arrival was not universally welcomed. There were members who feared, reasonably enough, that a wealthy man was simply purchasing his way into a fellowship of seekers, that the purity of the mission would be diluted by the presence of a financier. What changed their minds was that his enthusiasm turned out to be real. He revered the organization's founder, Sebastian Banks, who had created Constellation back in 2275 with nothing but the conviction that the unknown was worth a life. And he spoke of Banks the way a believer speaks of a personal hero, the way you speak of someone whose example quietly organizes your own. That sincerity earned him his place. But look at how his belief expressed itself, because the form of his devotion is the whole point. He did not become a great explorer. He became the money. He funds the equipment that fills the lodge, the quiet headquarters in New Atlantis where the seekers gather. He paid for the Eye, the deep space scanner placed in orbit around Jemison, the very instrument through which Constellation peers outward, which means that even the organization's act of looking is something Walter Stroud purchased. He brought new members into the fold. He holds a seat on the Freestar Collective's Council of Governors, a place at the table where worlds are governed. Every one of these is a real and meaningful contribution, and every one of them keeps him precisely one step removed from the thing itself. He is the patron, never the pilgrim. He makes the seeing possible without ever quite looking. And yet to paint him only as a ledger with a face would be to miss him entirely. He keeps a friendly rivalry with Matteo Catri, the universal theologian among Constellation's ranks, the two of them circling the same mysteries from opposite ends, one reaching toward the divine he believes the artifacts conceal, the other reaching toward the practical, each gently certain the other has misunderstood the point. And there are smaller moments that complicate the portrait further. He has been known to check in on Vasco, Constellation's robot, for no reason at all, not to issue an order, not to extract a single thing of value, simply to ask how it is holding up, the way a person asks after something they have quietly grown fond of. The man who sees a set where everyone else sees a miracle is also the man who pauses to make sure the machinery is well. Pragmatism and tenderness are not opposites in him. They are the same steady attention, only turned in different directions. There is a moment that captures him completely, when one of the alien artifacts that obsess Constellation reveals itself, assembling itself in the air, defying everything ordinary understanding can explain. The explorers around it feel awe, the pure vertigo of contact with something beyond comprehension. Walter's response is different. That means there's a set, he says. Where others see a miracle, he sees an inventory. Where others feel the floor of reality tilt beneath them, he feels the cool click of a collector, recognizing that the piece in front of him implies more pieces somewhere, waiting to be acquired. There is even a reading in which that one remark gives him away, in which a man who concludes so quickly that there must be a set is half admitting he already suspected as much, that the financier had been carrying his own private theories about the artifacts all along and simply never saw a reason to say so. It would be easy to read the line as coldness, as the soul of a man who can reduce even the divine to a shopping list. And perhaps it is partly that. But it is also a kind of clarity that the dreamers around him do not possess, a refusal to be paralyzed by wonder, an instinct to turn astonishment into action. This is where the earlier parts of the story quietly change their meaning. The company that sells branded ships and the man who funds the search for the meaning of the universe are not two separate things. They are the same engine. The profit from every glossy vessel, every component stamped with the orange logo, every comfortable interior sold to someone who wanted to feel like an adventurer. That profit is what keeps the lights on at the lodge, what built the Eye, what lets the genuine seekers afford to seek. The commerce we might be tempted to look down on is the soil the idealism grows in. Without Walter's pragmatism, without his willingness to treat the frontier as a market and the artifact as a set, the purest expedition in human space could not buy fuel. So which is the real thing, the wonder or the wealth that underwrites it? Walter would probably refuse the question, and he might be right to. He represents an uncomfortable truth that the romance of exploration prefers to forget, that someone always has to pay, and that the person paying tends to see the universe a little differently than the person being paid for. He does not go out there. He ensures there is an out there to go to. Whether that distance is a failure of imagination or the most quietly heroic act in the whole enterprise is not a question the story ever fully answers. It only makes sure you cannot stop asking it. If you want to see what happens when corporate vision and human ambition are forced into the same room, you do not need to look at the frontier at all. You only need to look at a stalled project and a team that cannot agree. By the company's later years, the old dominance had begun to soften, and Stroud-Eklund went looking for the next thing that would set it apart. One of those gambles was an attempt to enter the luxury cruise market, to build not just ships, but experiences, floating palaces for the wealthy. It failed. Issa is the one who delivers the verdict, telling Walter plainly that the idea has not worked, and in that small admission, you can hear a company straining against its own appetite, reaching for prestige and coming up empty. Out of that failure came a new effort, a working group inside the Research and Development Division tasked with creating the next great ship, the vessel that would prove the firm still had its edge. And that effort had ground completely to a halt. The problem was not a lack of talent. The problem was that the project had too much of everything, and no one with the authority to choose. The team's lead was Jules de Gante, newly arrived, fresh from finishing at the top of her class and holding the very first project of her career as a manager, which meant she had walked into a room of stronger personalities and longer resumes with little more than a title to steady her. She tried to honor every voice at the table. That, precisely, was the trouble. Each voice wanted a different ship, and weighing all of them equally turned out to be the same as building none of them at all. There was Frank Yilmaz, the lead designer, who carried 10 years of experience like a grievance and resented that the project had not been handed to him. Frank wanted luxury, a craft for celebrities, mid-sized and spacious, built around comfort and protection and fitted with the most expensive components on the market, a flying statement of status. There was Ella Chaudhry, the senior technical designer, who had studied alongside Frank and who, almost alone among them, wanted the ship to be exactly what its name would promise, an explorer, made for the long jump and the far reach, a vessel built for going out rather than showing off. There was Mike Ababio, the senior engineer, who dreamed in sheer volume, an enormous ship, vast in cargo, the kind of hauler that measures its worth by how much of the frontier it can carry home. And there was Nev Papadopoulos from marketing, who pictured something gentler still, a comfortable, family-minded vessel with room for a whole crew to live, less a weapon or a warehouse than a home that happened to move between worlds. 5 people, 5 entirely different answers to one quiet question. What is a ship actually for? And a single vessel was somehow supposed to hold all of those answers at once, which is to say, it could hold none of them. This is the meaning hidden inside the project's own name. The ship was not failing because it was too modest. It was failing because it was over-designed, overloaded with competing intentions, pulled in 5 directions by 5 people who each believed they understood what the vessel was supposed to be. Ambition, it turns out, does not automatically add up. Put enough of it in one room without a hand to direct it, and it does not produce greatness. It produces paralysis. Every designer was talented, every vision had merit, and together they had built nothing but a stalemate. The vessel at the heart of all this carried a name worth noticing. They called it the Kepler, and the name, if it points where it almost certainly points, reaches back to one of the old astronomers from humanity's earliest reaching toward the sky, the mind that first traced the true shape of the planet's paths around their star and found cold, beautiful mathematics where everyone before had seen only mystery. A ship named for that kind of thinking ought to be an instrument of pure understanding, built to ask what is out there and nothing else. And here was that name, fixed to a project, buckling under the weight of people who could not agree on whether their ship should be a pleasure yacht, a cargo hauler, or a comfortable home for a family. Anything, it seemed, except the explorer that one of them had quietly hoped for, the dream of pure discovery, drowning in a committee. What breaks the deadlock is, in the end, a single outside hand willing to make a decision the insiders cannot, and the choice that hand makes determines what the Kepler becomes. Hold the budget tight, force the team toward focus, and the result is the leaner ship, restrained, coherent, a vessel that has finally agreed to be one thing instead of everything. Open the budget wide, indulge every ambition at once with what the team itself calls the kitchen sink, and the result is the larger, heavier, more capable machine, the one that tries to be everything. 2 ships, 2 philosophies, and they are not really about engineering at all. They are the company's entire soul rendered as a choice. Focus or excess, the lean dream or the maximal one, the clean question or the crowded answer. It is the same tension that built Stroud-Eklund in the first place, returned now in miniature. Vision against money, restraint against appetite. The marriage of a visionary and a fortune was always going to produce a company that pulled in 2 directions at once. And here, in a stalled boardroom above a frozen moon, you can watch that contradiction play out at human scale. The frontier did not break this team. Their own ambition did, and the only thing that could put the project back together was someone willing to stop dreaming long enough to decide. Everything ends, including advantages, and by 2330, the great surprise had worn off. The competitors that Stroud-Eklund once caught flat-footed had done what competitors always do. They studied, they adapted, they caught up. The enormous lead the company had enjoyed in its first burst of dominance was gone, eroded by the simple logic of a market in which any advantage is eventually copied. The firm remained respected, still recognized as a maker of fine ships and fine parts, respected enough, in fact, that its components became a favored target for thieves, who stripped them to upgrade vessels acquired by less honest means. There is a bleak compliment buried in that. To be worth stealing is to have made something good. But it is also the fate of every commodity, and that is what the frontier had quietly become in the company's hands. A thing of quality, yes. A thing that could be copied, traded, stolen, and surpassed. The romance had been industrialized, and industries do not stay astonishing for long. And yet, the most haunting trace the company left behind is not in any showroom or any sales figure. It is in a dead city. Londinian was once a United Colonies settlement, until a terramorph outbreak forced its abandonment, and the place was left to the silence, a city emptied of everyone, holding its breath in the dark. Somewhere in those ruins, the old logo of Eklund shipbuilders still survives, the ancestral mark from before the marriage, before the merger, before the orange trim and the trade tower and the whole reinvention. It was never updated because the city died before anyone came to change it. Everywhere else, the old name was painted over, rebranded, folded into the new identity until it vanished. Only here, in a place no one was left to maintain, did the past escape being erased. Think about what that means. The company's triumph was, in its own way, an act of forgetting. To become the gleaming manufacturer of cutting-edge ships, Stroud-Eklund had to bury what it used to be, the modest maker of consumer goods, the older family firm, the earlier and humbler self. Success rewrote the story so completely that the original chapter almost disappeared, and the only reason a fragment of it endures is catastrophe. The terrormorph took the city, and in taking it, accidentally preserved a truth the living world had no use for. The dead remember what the prosperous prefer to forget. There is something fitting in that, and something sad. A company built on selling the future left its only honest monument in a ruin. The frontier it commodified, the wonder it packaged and sold, the ambition it married to a fortune, all of it produced enormous wealth and beautiful machines and a genuine contribution to humanity's reach. And all of it, in the end, rests on a forgetting that only a dead city was faithful enough to refuse. And there is a darker possibility folded into the deepest layers of the story, glimpsed only by those who have walked the strangest paths between the worlds. In some turnings of the universe, Walter does not partner with the Seekers at all. He treats the hunt for the artifacts as exactly what his instincts always whispered it was: a contract, a job to be outsourced to whoever will complete it most efficiently. And so he hires the ecliptic, the mercenaries, the guns available for rent, rather than throwing in his lot with Constellation and its idealists. It is the same man, the same intelligence, the same clear-eyed refusal to be paralyzed by awe. Only the idealism has been quietly subtracted, and what remains, if you follow the thread to its end, is exploration reduced entirely to transaction, the search for the meaning of existence placed in the hands of people who care nothing for the meaning and everything for the fee. That version of Walter is not a monster. He reads, if anything, as the merchant without the patron, the balance sheet without the reverence for Sebastian Banks that once redeemed it. He is, you could say, what the whole enterprise becomes when the wonder is finally and fully optimized away, the frontier as pure product, with no one left aboard who still remembers why anyone wanted it. So return now to where this began. We started with the suspicion that exploration and industry are opposites, that the purity of reaching for the stars is somehow corrupted the moment money enters the room. But the story of Stroud-Eklund does not let that suspicion stand. The branded ship and the bottomless question are not enemies. The merchant and the patron are the same man. The profit from every glossy vessel is what built the scanner through which the dreamers do their dreaming. Every age of discovery has needed its financiers, its factories, its showrooms, its Walters, someone willing to look at the infinite and see a set, so that someone else can look at it and simply feel the awe. The question was never whether commerce corrupts wonder. The harder, quieter question is whether wonder can survive being made into a product, scaled, branded, and sold, and whether it matters if it does, so long as the doors stay open and the ships keep leaving. which leaves one last thing to sit with on a frozen moon beside a ship that is almost finished. When you finally fly out past the edge of the known in a vessel that someone designed to be desired, costed to be profitable, and stamped with a name not your own, whose dream are you really living? Yours, alone in the dark with the great question, or the one that was quietly built for you and sold to you long before you ever looked up? We will keep asking. There are more names in the dark, more companies and patrons and beautiful machines, more places where ambition met the void and tried to make a market of it. Stay with us, and we will keep turning them over, one by one, in the long quiet between the stars.